Good morning, this is asiatechpodcast. We today are at Singapore Poly, the Singapore Poly Entrepreneurship Centre, Spinoff. I'm going to introduce you to the people who make Spinoff possible, who support the startups and the educational community here in Singapore. We are on the Asiatech podcast tour of Startup Ecosystem. So, if you've caught any of the other tours, you will know that there are startups out there who get all the limelight, but behind those startups, there are the people who support them, accelerators, programs, incubators, co-working spaces, and so on. So who are the unsung heroes of the Asian startup ecosystem? Let me introduce two of them today. Sitting around the table here at Spinoff, we have Neelesh and Rafael. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Graham.
Good morning to you.
Morning.
Good morning, Graham.
Let's do the quick introduction round robin. So who are you and where are you from and how did you get into this? Then we'll talk a little bit about Spinoff, what you do here, and curious as well about the kind of startups that you have here and the people that come onto the program, you know, a little bit about your program, and also the challenges in growing startups here in a successful economy like Singapore. So Neelesh, maybe we can start with yourself.
Sure.
You're a startup entrepreneur originally, right? So
yeah, I have a checkered history. I started off actually with sound engineering and music production for 15 years before I decided enough was enough. And then I started my first company. I had an exit. I went to work for corporate in India. We actually, in fact, at that point set up one of the biggest film schools in India. I did that for about 6 years and then came here to Singapore. Set up two more startups here, which were successful and exited from there. And then the fourth one failed. And actually, it was because of that that I got into Singapore Polytechnic, because at that point I was quite desperate to kind of get into something which could help me pay my monthly bills. So that's how I got into Singapore Polytechnic, and at that point I got in as a lecturer to teach music production. I did that for 2 years before I moved into entrepreneurship, and I started developing this particular program for what is now known as the School of Computing, where we developed an entrepreneurship program across a period of 3 years. And it's that program now which has morphed into Spinoff as the Entrepreneurship Center.
Great. Yeah. And it's a very honest story as well, isn't it? That when we talk about startups, we often talk about success. That's what's celebrated in the news, in the media. And you shared, if I can sort of talk about it now, off tape, a personal story as well about, you've actually been here. So I think that the point is that you empathize with startup founders. You understand the frustrations and the pain and the risk involved, right? You're not just an academic teaching entrepreneurship, right? And being a musician, you know, you love music, you love your instruments as well, and you had to sell your guitars to fund your failure. How was that? Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think if we can just give some prominence to that, it really shows that you are, you know, you walk the walk.
Well, it's a very lonely journey when you're failing. It's not something that I wish on anybody. Especially, you know, the thing is, once you start having success stories early on, you tend to get too overconfident about what you can do and what you can't. And that was the case with me. I feel in hindsight, I was just way too overconfident about my abilities in managing the cash flow and stuff, and we just got into some bad issues. Luckily for me, the people that I was working with at that point were nice enough to understand that this was something that you know, happens with startups from time to time. I'm still very good, you know, friends with them in that sense. But you're right. I had to sell off a lot of gear, and you know, at those days I used to collect two things. I used to collect vintage guitars, and I used to collect vintage wine. And because I had a pretty, you know, large collection, that came in handy to pay off a lot of bills that I owed people. To make matters worse, that was the same time when I was actually going through a divorce as well. So it was a double whammy. Literally, in the span of about 3 weeks, my company failed, and then the divorce thing came in. So it was a very painful time, very tough time, but it also made me realize who my friends are, the real friends. And it also made me realize that things can only get better from this point. I guess that mindset is very important. If I had a very weak mindset, I would have probably ended up in clinic somewhere, being treated for depression.
Yeah.
But the way I took it was basically, okay, this is it. This is as low as it can get. What else can happen beyond that? So the only way to kind of look at it is, okay, how do I start crawling back up? So yeah, it's a painful journey. It's a lonely journey, but it also will teach you so many things about your life, your own self. You probably get to understand about who you are as a person, which I think is very, very important. And that's why I am a firm believer in startups failing early, so that they can learn from those mistakes and then move forward.
Yeah, and how important that is, and really telling it as it is as well. So setting people's expectations about what startup life is like.
Yeah.
One of the things I tell people is that I haven't picked up the last 240 paychecks, which is 20 years. Every month I've had to hustle. I haven't had the security of somebody saying, this month you're going to get paid X. 20 years of that. And when I tell people, startup founders who are just starting out in the journey, that some of them, you can see it's ticking over, thinking, oh, what am I getting into here? And once you're in. And then you have these successes. I can imagine that must be a challenge, isn't it? Because now you think, well, I can do anything here. Yeah. And I suppose young people, they watch movies like The Social Network, and they see young people raising billions. It looks pretty easy, right?
Yeah. But it's not. And in fact, the thing, the most difficult thing for me was primarily that when I failed, I was in my mid-30s, and that's the time when, especially in Asian families, we tend to kind of see, okay, mid-30s, you should be settled by then.
Right. You should have worked it out by now.
Right. So the thing is that it's a little bit more challenging, especially when you've got bills to pay, you've got kids to send to school, and you don't know when your next paycheck is going to come from.
Right.
And to me, it was a situation where I literally did not know how I'm going to buy school supplies for my kid. I had two friends who actually stepped forward to help me out, and it was primarily because of their help that I survived for 6 months, because on my own I just could not have managed it. And I'm very thankful for that.
Wow, that's a good story. There's a great quote by Mike Tyson. He says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Yeah. So startup life can be cruel sometimes, but I think that's the beauty of it as well, is that successes then are really real successes. You've worked for everything yourself. You've created that. And I think that is really what we want to get out as well, that whole sort of mindset. We'll talk a bit about Spinoff and what you do to help promote the entrepreneurial mindset here, because there's a technical information that you can teach about startups, building an MVP, all that sort of stuff. But there's also the mindset stuff as well. So I'm really glad that you shared an honest story as well. Neelesh, Rafael, sitting around the table. Your story's a little bit different. How did you come to Spinoff?
All right. A little bit similar in a certain way to Neelesh. Previous entrepreneur turned entrepreneurial educator. I actually started my journey in Australia, Melbourne, Australia. So I started it while I was still a student. So in a way, I can affiliate to how our young entrepreneurs here feel like during the day, their daily grind. Started it while I was doing my undergrad. I saw opportunities in home moving businesses. International students were always, for some reason, moving houses. Every semester they always had a place to move. So they needed to go somewhere else and so on. So I saw an opportunity there, and I started my first fleet of vehicles. And then I moved on to a human resource business. So my experience there in Australia was primarily into the services and to the brick and mortar. I did my human resource business for a while. We brought in trade skills. We pushed them around Melbourne, Australia, and Victoria. And after a while, that stopped due to a change in government regulations. And I found my way back here into Singapore. When I came back to Singapore, I started my career in education. So I did private teachings, private universities here, but it was more into business education. And I wanted to get very heavily involved in entrepreneurship education. And that's where I found my way into Enterprise Development Center in Institute of Technical Education in ITE. So I spent quite a good amount of time there training our ITE students. For those who are unfamiliar with the route of our students, normally in secondary school they get entrepreneurship education through competitions and lecturers and so on. And then after that, they move into junior colleges or they move into polys. But for a good 20,000 students, they go into ITEs first. Now, ITEs are also pushing out entrepreneurship education, and that's where I started my experiences in teaching entrepreneurs. And we were very heavy into brick and mortar, and we were doing startups that were in sports coaching, hair and beauty, and so on. And I wanted to get more involved into technology, and so that's how I found my way into Spinoff here, working together with Neelesh and our tech startups. Yeah, so that's my story. But obviously, the element which I've not mentioned into there is how did I come into Singapore after spending a good decade in Australia. So I went through quite a lot of challenges moving from businesses. I mean, the startup phase was very, very, very challenging. I mean, we all start with limited resources. And at that time, I was still studying. So I had to juggle with my day, going to uni. And I also had to juggle with meeting clients and so on. I remember meeting a client, and then after that, I couldn't carry on the meeting further because I had to rush back to class to give my presentation, my end of semester presentation. So it was all that. And, you know, no man is an island. So when we try and take on staff, obviously we have to pay them. So there's the bills to pay, there's the stuff to pay. So how about the founder? You know, normally the founder is the one who pays everyone first before paying themselves. Yeah. So these were quite a lot of the challenges that we share with my students. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you both about this idea of teaching entrepreneurship. Some people would argue you cannot teach it, especially in an educational institution. What are your thoughts on that? Would you agree to some extent, or how do you teach entrepreneurship? Surely the only way to teach it is to go through the kind of paths that you've been through and experience the failure.
So I would kind of say yes and no. That entrepreneurship can be taught. It's a yes and no answer. Yes, because there are a few concepts about entrepreneurship that can be taught.
Yeah.
For example, how do you build a business model? What is a business model? What is an MVP? What is a lean startup? That can be taught. What can't be taught is the experience. That is something that the students need to feel it for themselves. So what we do here at Spinoff is primarily get students to experience the journey for themselves. The way we've developed the program teaches them all that they need to do in terms of the concepts. But at the same time, they have to really roll up their sleeves, get their hands dirty, and start up. And we expect them to fail. And we expect them to go through the challenges that any startup founder would. The pains that any startup founder would actually go through in an academic setting. So how do we do that? For starters, we've opened up the program to all students on campus. I personally believe that entrepreneurship is a great equalizer, and it doesn't matter what your background is or what field of study that you're part of. This is something that is very essential, and you need to kind of go through it. So we've opened up the program to all faculties. And we work very, very closely with a business school here on campus who actually manage this entire program. So we have this entrepreneurship at SP committee that oversees all the entrepreneurship related activities on campus. And so business school runs the academic program for our full-time students. And what they do is basically, through the period of 15 weeks, they match students into multi-disciplinary teams of 4. The students don't come in with a business idea. We don't care for a business idea. What we care for is a problem which they feel strongly about and they want to solve. So we teach them on how do you identify problems. and convert them into opportunities. That can be taught. So once we teach that, then they have to apply. So then they apply this in their own little 4-people group, which they call their own startup. And each of the students is given a role, so CTO, CFO, CEO, so on and so forth. Through the journey of 15 weeks, they literally have to convert that problem statement into a product, into a business model, into a full 3-year financial revenue model, into a pitch, and the pitch is eventually done on demo day to real investors. So we call in actual investors. So we've got space ventures coming in, we've got investable coming in, we have seed ventures. They come in and it's pretty much like Shark Tank, and we tell them, please don't treat our students with kid gloves. Give it to them. If you think that this is not, if you think it's a waste of your time, then the students should know why it is a waste of your time. But along the 15 weeks, the students don't come to a classroom. All the learning happens online, but every single week they are supposed to meet up with mentors. So we assign mentors to each group. Each group has one academic mentor, and then they have access to mentors from the industry, depending on what kind of a business vertical they're part of. So through those 15 weeks, then they experience what it takes to become an entrepreneur. Because when we talk about validation of whatever they are doing, say, for example, if they've built a business model, then the next challenge for them is, okay, you've built a business model, you've understood what a business model is. Let's see if you can get it validated. So typically in an academic situation, what happens is students will put up a survey monkey thing on Facebook and get their friends to answer. And they'll come back and say, oh, I want 90% validation. That's not how we work. Yeah. We actually get them to go out, find their customers, find their stakeholders, interview them on video, and come back and analyze it, and then decide whether this has been validated or not.
In the wild.
In the wild. Yeah. And they have to literally go out there, and so they're literally, for somebody who's 17, 18, 19 years old, to go out there and talk to people who they don't know, and not just talk to them, but to reach out to them on their own and ask for permission to kind of interview them. It's a big task. Especially here in Singapore.
In the US, for example, everybody's trained to do that from a young age, right?
So over here, it's a huge deal. Yeah. I mean, we literally push them to do this. Yeah. And because our program is an academic program for our full-time students, we have to make sure that it is also, there's a grading system as part of it. Because this does show up on their transcripts. But the grading system is not based on whether you can get funded or whether you can go to market. The grading system is based on how good your validation is. Have you really gone out there, out of your comfort zone to really hustle? Yeah. So that's what the grading is based on. And along the journey, we do see students who really have a knack for it.
Right. Well, this is what I want to ask you, because this is a key question here, is that, on our show, we sit mostly with corporate dropouts. So of a certain age, with a certain experience and a certain background. Yet we don't get students on our show. So what does it take to become an entrepreneur and a successful one? And those who take to it, if you were to sit with a new batch, your new cohort comes in, and let's say there's 10 people sitting around the table. What qualities are displayed of the ones that you think, if you had to back them without seeing their business plan or even hearing them, like their pitch or anything, what are the qualities that they bring to the table? Can you identify that? Having seen a number of batches now, are you seeing patterns and saying, yeah, all right, what do you see?
One word: hunger. How hungry are you? That's what's important. I mean, a lot of people say it's passion. Right. Passion's great. It's a good point to start with, passion, but passion's not going to feed you.
What's the difference between hunger and passion?
Okay,
because they're both drives.
So let me go back into say photography. I'm big time into photography these days. I'm really passionate about it. I spend every weekend going out taking photos, street photography. But if I wanted photography to pay my bills, I needed to be hungry enough to work in that environment full time so that it pays my bills. So startups at the end of the day, it's all about hunger. Yes, passion gets you started, no doubt about it. But the sustainability happens because of hunger.
But how do you have that hunger when, mum and dad, are underwriting your existence here at the Polytechnic, like any educational institution, right?
Well, it's not true. A lot of students here don't have their education paid for by their mom and dad. Sometimes it's through scholarships. Sometimes it's through other means. It's a misconception that all parents are able to support their the studies. There are, of course, a majority are supported fully supported by their parents, but not a few. But having said that, it all boils down to the personal, the individual as well, right? There are people, and I can give you so many examples of my past students. I'll give you a great example of one of my students called Clinton. I met him in the first year. And right on the very first day, before, as soon as we finished the introductions, and he got up and he was introducing himself, and he said, I joined this course primarily because I want to be an entrepreneur. You don't hear that from a 17, 18-year-old
He's already got a
kid.
Goal and a clear vision of what he wants to become.
Yeah, so then it is like, when you ask
how
him...
How old is he?
He was about 17.
17.
Yeah. And then when you ask him, like, why do you want to be an entrepreneur? Of course, it's like, because I've seen Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, and I want to be my own boss and I want to make a lot of money. So it's a whole glamorization bit of it. So then I know that this guy has a goal, but the reason for why he wants to be an entrepreneur maybe not entirely correct. I mean, yes, everybody wants to make money, but that should not be the starting point. So then it is up to us to mold them, to mentor them, to put them on the right track. Eventually, this particular kid went on to win the bronze award in the youth entrepreneurship award 2 years back, I think. I think a year or 2 years back. He's got funded. He's got his own startup, and he's doing fine. In fact, he's now the president of Edge, which is the youth entrepreneurship wing at ACE. Yeah. And he's a student that we worked with. So there are these kind of students who, and he comes from a very good background. So there are these kind of students who actually make that difference. I've got one group here at the moment, and again, the students are pretty well off. They don't need to do this, but it's the hunger. They want to do this because they want to show it to their parents, their friends. That
it might not be a financial thing. It might be an emotional hunger,
thing,
or a social hunger, whatever it may be. Yeah. People have different motivations.
Yes, right. And we've got one particular student here who actually asked to get into this team because her entire team decided that they don't have the stomach for this. Right. And so we said, okay, fine. We don't force anybody to get into entrepreneurship. So after they finished their 15-week program, the team kind of collapsed. But this particular student, she came to me. She said, is there any other team that is really looking to get into entrepreneurship? I would love to work with them. And she doesn't need to do this. And she's part of a team now that has just received a term sheet last week. So, hunger.
Yeah, absolutely. And the right people will rise to the occasion, right? I think at the end of the day, people will get knocked back. People won't have access to resources that other people may have, but eventually the right people will come through, right? And I guess what you're doing here, apart from the actual tools that you're equipping people with, which is like, for example, you talk about, you may train them in term sheets or, what's a convertible note, something like that. Beyond that, you're surrounding them with good people. Because if you're an entrepreneur, you're on the margins already of society, right? Because you've chosen to play by your own rules or a different set of rules, right? Therefore, you're maybe 10%. I don't know what the numbers are. You may be 10% of society. But if that's the case, then you're not surrounded by people who think like you. So to create a space where people, especially when they're young, I mean, how important that is, when you're young, you want to be part of a group, you don't want to be on the outside, how important those social pressures are. So when you create Spinoff, you're not just giving people the tools, you're giving them a space and an understanding that actually it's okay to think and be like this, because the case study examples, these young students, right? If they then went into the quote unquote normal world, they may have been thinking, oh, I'm a bit different. I think differently about business or life or career. And everybody else around me, they're thinking about, you know, getting a safe job and all that kind of stuff and being stable. And yet I'm thinking about this. Am I a bit weird? Am I different? And then they sort of edit themselves, don't they, and become sort of like more like the mainstream.
So this is what I tell my student participants, right? So basically it is, at this age, if you start up, what do you have to lose? The risk factor for you is next to nothing, because your parents most likely are paying your bills. And when you work here as part of Spinoff, we don't charge you, rent for the co-sharing space. Your marketing costs are subsidized substantially because it's a school program. We give you access to all the mentors that otherwise you would have to go and struggle to find yourself. And we give you access to the investment partners again, otherwise you would have had to go and find yourself. So, and even if you fail at the end of it all, you can still say, okay, fine, I can go to university and do something else, or I can go and find a 9-to-5 and do something else. The point being that if you fail early, the cost of failure is a lot less.
Yeah.
Unlike when I failed in my mid-30s, that was total panic and chaos. I had the stress of how am I going to pay my bills.
Yeah.
These kids don't have that challenges.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important for them to try this out, because they have nothing to lose.
Yeah. Well, let's also talk about that, because I imagine that, as would be with any program, only a percentage of people actually become startup entrepreneurs long term, or their startup is successful. I mean, 1 in 6 startups make it through 12 months. Everybody else is going to fail. That's part of how it is. That's the law of the jungle, right? And let's talk about those that don't become startup entrepreneurs, because last week we were at level 3, which is a partnership between Unilever and the startup world, and how much money corporates now are throwing at their people to become more startup-like. So there's a whole world out there who, they're not in startups, but they're thinking like startups, but they work, corporate jobs, entrepreneurs, or these people that corporates are now saying you have to be more agile or think lean, or at the end of the day, it's do more with less, right? You don't have these huge budgets. So let's talk about those as well, because I imagine a chunk of your batch go into corporate. So it's not all loss. Actually, it's a real bonus, isn't it? Because now corporates are seeking out people with this sort of mindset.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that make these programs stand out, make Spinoff stand out, is to answer also a question you asked previously, about our student startups and so on. One of the main things is rejection. So you see, here's the difference. You have student startups or students who try to startups, and then they get into the world of entrepreneurship. Now, in IHLs, what primarily happens sometimes is they get involved in competitions, or they get involved in education and the pitching itself and so on. But they don't really get involved in rejection when they try to validate. So rejection makes a person stronger. Rejection makes all our startups stronger. In order for our students to go through our program, complete our program, we put them in front of real VCs, real investors. And every question, or every time they are in front of VCs and investors, they always ask the same question: how do you validate it? And like Neelesh was saying, the validation techniques that we teach them is not just to get secondary information. They actually have to go out, speak to the customer. Whoever they have identified as their customer or so on, or who is going to give them revenue, they approach them and they ask questions. They try and do a sale. And quite a lot of times, you never get the sale in the first instance. And they have to come back and have to think and re-strategize again. Is this really their target market? Because some of the questions coming back it's quite enlightening for them. So the rejection is the one that really trains them that puts them ahead, especially when if they choose not to become entrepreneurs and they go and look for employment next time. They would have gone through this first before anything else. They make them more resistant.
Rejection. There is a great book called Rejection Therapy.
I
thoroughly recommend it. If you have students who are hungry for this kind of material, it's amazing. It's about a guy who 100 days every day, he's an entrepreneur. He forces himself to get rejected. So he'll walk in, knock on somebody's house on the door and said, can I plant a flower in your front garden? Like just a random stranger.
Yeah.
Just so you can get rejected.
Right.
Getting over that, because, you know, especially if you go into the world of corporates, you're rarely in the situation where you're naked and vulnerable in the wild again, out there, right?
Yeah.
But to get over that and get through it and realize, actually, I didn't get eaten alive here.
So like I said earlier, I'm into street photography, and we get rejected all the times because you go up to random people on the street and say, can I take a portrait of you because I find your face very interesting or whatever, and 90% of the time you just get rejected. Right. So yeah.
What's it like the first time you have to do that?
Daunting, but the thing is, it also teaches you. Next time it becomes, you become more and more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with our students. The more they go through it, then they become very comfortable with it. And the thing is, the ones who start up, but the ones who don't, what we are also seeing a trend is that these are the students who are actually, when they go out for interviews, for job interviews, they're the ones who are getting hired quickly because they understand what a company needs to survive. Right? They understand how do you identify problems for your customers, how do you sell a product to a customer, how do you build a business model, how do you build a sales and marketing strategy, how do you build your entire financial model. There's a lot of empathy that these kids have for working for somebody else because they understand what the founder is going through.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then they're not sort of approaching it in a passive way.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, whatever you teach them here, that sort of converting them from very passive learning to active learning, and like going out and doing and like pitching VCs, real VCs for real money, and facing rejection, and going out there and building this stuff hands on. How important those skills are. And I don't think until you actually go into the world of corporate, you realize how missing these skills are, right?
I used to have a student group. They were really good. They won competitions. They were very good at pitching. They could present. They could really present. Their business model was to actually collect recycled glass bottles, and then after that they would slump them and make it into plates, right? So in order to validate, in order to face rejection, in order to do sales, we told them, I said, okay, go to Boat Quay and go to Clarke Quay. Go to every pub and bar in there and walk in and try and sell your plate.
Yeah.
Right. So they did that for 2 weekends, and they did not get a sale. They were shivering. They realized that in a classroom or in a lecture hall, they were great at presenting.
How important this is. We all remember that kid from school who got like 3 A's or 5 A's, as a straight A student. But as soon as they left school and they went into the world of work, they got a good job, but you see them 10, 15 years on, they're still there, still doing that thing. They haven't moved on, right?
A very interesting story about this. So, I mentioned earlier about one of our students, Clinton, who now is the president at Edge. He wasn't a very great student. He's getting his C's and D's and that kind of stuff. But when at the graduation time, he was a valedictorian because the things that he did outside of classroom was just tremendous. Collectively, when you look at what he's done compared to the entire cohort, the list of things that he's done is just amazing.
Yeah.
And so these are the kind of things, and I see a lot of students in our office. They may not be excellent students, but to us it doesn't really matter because they're the ones who are out there getting things done. And it's very true. If you look at what's happening out there in the corporate world, chances are that yes, the scholars do get the better jobs immediately, but that doesn't mean that the others who are not scholars cannot succeed.
Yeah.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Absolutely. And in a lot of your students, there's definitely a way, right, for them to
they have to find a way.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully that's what you teach them as well. What is your hope for programs like this? Talk about first in the context of Singapore Poly, where this goes long term with Spinoff. What do you hope this becomes? Because obviously, you are pioneering in a space as well. And everybody's trying to work out, higher education is trying to work out how to make themselves more relevant, how to bridge that gap into the startup world and the corporate world. So first of all, let's talk about the context of Spinoff, where you are now, long term. What do you hope this becomes? and then also, you know, on a broader plane outside of Singapore as well, across Asia, because this is a real challenge, isn't it? And we go to the US, and they seem to be ahead in terms of you know, you go to Stanford, for example, it's right in the heart of Silicon Valley. Here in Asia, you know, we also have become a victim of our own success in a little bit. We've had very fast, high growth economies, you know, family attitudes towards career, the safety and security of career and so on. What do you hope this does in terms of creating more relevant skills long term? So let's talk about Singapore Poly and Spinoff first. 5 years from now, what will this look like? What do you hope?
Well, I can already see it changing and growing a lot faster than what I had hoped for. So for example, last year we also launched the same program as a CET program for adults, for working adults. Because we realize that there are a lot of adults who are out there who are looking for a career change, who are looking to start up new businesses, but they don't know how, or they probably cannot get into the other, you know, accelerator programs which are out there in Singapore at the moment. And the big challenge for them is, you know, how do you start up at this age? So we want to provide a platform for them to actually try. To, you know, whatever you have in your mind, try before you know, talk to, say, somebody like a Y Combinator or 500 startups. So we want to be that platform which creates the pipeline into the other bigger programs, where they can test everything out at a cost which is negligible. We don't take equity, we don't touch IP, everything belongs to the founders. But we also provide the founders with a facility which allows them not just to learn, but also to experiment. We give them, you know, access to co-sharing spaces, and we give them access to building prototypes here on campus. And it's all part of a fee. They don't pay anything extra beyond that. So that's within Singapore. I mean, we really hope to be that you know, centerpiece for people who have no other option to really learn about how do you start up. And we are industry agnostic. We don't really, it doesn't matter to us whether tech-enabled or non-tech-enabled startup, doesn't really matter. We will support and help anybody who wants to try. At a regional level, we've already started building what we hope will be the largest entrepreneurship education network across Asia Pacific. So I'm building this thing called Lexicon by Spinoff, which is a network of all the institutes of higher learning across the region who come together to offer programs that are in line with what we are doing here. So what happens is I basically reach out to academic partners around the region. We offer them our 15-week business acceleration program, and we train their trainers to deliver the same pedagogy the way we are delivering it here in Singapore. We help them build their own incubation and co-working spaces under the brand name of Lexicon by Spinoff. And we give them access, and we, in partnership with them, we build a mentoring network and an investment partner network in that region. And we're doing this literally across Asia Pacific. At this very moment, we have close to about 7 to 8 partners across the country, across the continent. We have about 15,000 students who go through our program every 15 weeks. And that number is only growing, and we hope to hit almost 100,000 students by the end of this year, and possibly 500,000 by next year. And the reason we are doing this is because we hope that Spinoff becomes the epicenter of youth entrepreneurship eventually. We are doing this because we understand that entrepreneurship is where it's at. If you look at countries outside of Singapore, whether it's Indonesia, Vietnam, India, Philippines, there is so much of potential, and the youth out there is hungry for opportunities, but they don't know where to start. And we want to give them that hope that, hey, listen, anybody can do this, and we can show you how. And if they succeed, so do we. Again, we don't take equity, we don't touch IP. Everything belongs to the founders. We just give them a platform for them to try out their crazy ideas, and see whether they want to move them forward, but they have a stomach for it. Because at the end of the day, if you look at China, India, and ASEAN, that's the biggest market that there is.
Yeah.
And we want to be at the center of the youth education and entrepreneurship education specifically, in this market.
Well, let's put the call out there. If anybody is watching or listening who is in that space, higher education in Asia, and needs to talk to somebody about who can help them onboard a program like this, what's the best way they can reach out? How do they get in touch with you?
Oh, very simple. They can send an email to either Rafael or me, and we will get back to them within 24 hours.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And is there any sort of pre-qualification for that? Are there a particular, can any higher education institute reach out? Or?
Any higher education institution that is willing to open up its program to all their students from all disciplines, they're more than welcome to kind of contact us.
Great.
Yep. If you want to walk in physically, we are at Spinoff Center, Singapore Polytechnic, block T19333.
We'll put all the details in the show notes. Gentlemen, Neelesh and Rafael, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for sharing
Likewise, thank you.
a bit about your background and also the vision here for Spinoff. Anything we can do to support youth entrepreneurship and what you're doing here and the work you're doing, be happy to work with you at some point. Get the name out there as a starting point, because I'm sure there may just be one or two people who just happen to be right there on the radar at that time, but just reach out, we'll put the details so that you can do that and just say hello as an introduction. Say, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm trying to do, let's talk. That's the starting point, isn't it? It doesn't have to go through very convoluted academic channels. Right? You can just reach out to people directly.
Yeah. And at the same time, I would just like to kind of say one more thing, is that if you're a working adult in Singapore and if you're looking to kind of start up, please do contact us. There's a lot of things that we can do to help you guys. Not just connecting you to our networks, but to actually help you build a product and build a validated business model. So do reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to help you.
Our program is also Skills Future funded. So if you're 40 and above and you are a Singapore citizen or PR, the price you pay to join our CET program is about $400.
Yeah, that's about 10% of it, is it? Yeah. I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
All right. Thoroughly enjoyable. Thank you so much for your time this morning. And, you're welcome here at Singapore Poly and Spinoff. This is Graham Brown from asiatechpodcast. We are on the Pitchdeck Asia tour of startup ecosystems in Asia. If you run a program, an accelerator, an incubator, or even a fund, reach out. We would love to talk to you and shine a spotlight on your work.